Marc and Roger, how are you?
Hi, Gary. Roger?
Well, I think we're all quite brave to be starting a conversation 25 minutes before kickoff. So, yay us.
I know you're anxious to get to the game, Roger.
Couldn't possibly care less.
So, how have you guys been over the last week? We missed you last week, Marc.
Thank you, Gary. I've been good. We had a weekend with one of our sons last weekend, and that was a great lot of fun. And been holding down the fort this week.
And how have you been, Roger?
Played the worst tennis I've played in 5 years this morning, so that was a highlight. Managed to also tweak my back at the same time. However, we are 4 days away from heading to California and southern Utah, so life is good. And I have a little a wee dram of the world's best single malt Scotch here to make me feel better. So,
is that in preparation for the Super Bowl?
No, this is in preparation for the evening.
Because it's a little early for you to be drinking.
It's a little early for me, but it is Super Bowl Sunday, and Marc's going to talk about libertarianism and things, and that's why I think a little Scotch is in order. And I think Marc knows I am obsessed with Lagavulin single malt, 16-year-old from a small island off the Scottish coast, and so cheers.
I had a wonderful gift arrive yesterday from a friend of mine, a 18-year-old bottle of Glenmorangie that seems way too good for, other than special occasions. But
you might want to save that for my next visit.
What a wonderful idea.
So, and Roger, when we chatted last week, we talked about potentially having an apprentice join us. Is that still a possibility?
Yeah, it's going to happen. It's just in process. It's
okay,
going to
very
take
good.
me a little bit of organizing to put together, but haven't forgot about it. And I've spoken to the folks who run the apprenticeship program that I want to feature, and they are interested in doing it. Just a matter of working out some of the details.
Be great, wonderful. So I do, before, just to pay homage to those sports lovers out there. It is the Super Bowl. It is Super Bowl Sunday, 2022. And I know we've had some episodes, Roger, about your thoughts and feelings about sports. And I'm not sure how Marc in the same camp and kind of not that interested, or do you have, Marc, some interest in who might be playing tonight?
I have virtually no interest in professional football personally. There may have been a time in my ill-spent youth when I paid a little bit of attention to it, but I am a baseball fan of long standing. I love baseball. I absolutely hate what Major League Baseball is doing right now, however, with regard to these protracted contract negotiations, which have already served to screw up spring training and may even impact the season, which seems to me to be, all about greed mostly, which is pretty much what professional sports have always been about, but it's more pronounced now than ever before. I do enjoy college basketball. I'm a fan of Roger's Gonzaga Bulldogs. I think they have a really interesting approach to intercollegiate sports, and so I pick and choose my interest in sports pretty selectively.
So no interest or thoughts about who's playing tonight. Roger, do you have anything to say about it, or do we just move on?
Couldn't possibly care less.
All right.
I
No,
think
I
the last time I
oh,
watched a
go ahead.
Super Bowl game, the last time I watched a Super Bowl game, I think was when Joe Namath was playing for the New York Jets, and I think 7 or 8 years old, and I was so obsessed at that point that my dad was a Mormon bishop, and I took my TV, a little black and white portable TV with rabbit ears, and stuck it in the kitchen of the church building, and went and kept sneaking out of church to catch the score. But those days, I grew up.
Okay. Now I do have to ask, Mark, what are you drinking?
My wife just made a cup of, I think it's maybe Irish breakfast tea at 3 o'clock
Okay,
in the afternoon. So
that's lovely. And Roger, remind us one more time what you're drinking.
This is a um, a really beautiful single malt Scotch, 16-year-old from called Lagavulin. It's from an island called Islay, just off the Scottish coast, and it is unique in so Islay has 4 or 5 distilleries on it, all of which make this very distinctive kind of single malt Scotch that has a very distinctive peat. So when they make this is more than you asked for, but
That's great. No,
they, when they take the barley and create the malt, they actually put peat on the floor on a floor underneath it and burn the peat, very smoky peat that rises up and heats the barley to malt it, and that smoke um, instills itself into the flavor, and then it's right on the ocean, and so you get this sort of sea salt air coming in at the same time, and so you get Lagavulin has this fascinating combination of peat and sort of briny flavor, a little bit of iodine, very much an acquired taste. But most Scotch experts consider it among the top 5 or so single malts in the world. And a single malt is one in which each malting is put into casks and not blended with other maltings. And so a lot of Scotch is blended, which is perfectly fine. It's also lovely, but Lagavulin is the pinnacle in my humble opinion. Although Glenmorangie, they do some interesting things with oak and other kinds of casking that delivers a really beautiful flavor as well.
it's remarkable to me, much like winemaking in certain parts of the world where winemaking is really sophisticated. Um, the making of whiskey in Scotland is just so diverse. I mean, you can go from literally a few miles away from one distillery to the next and get an entirely different kind of scotch, and it's really quite amazing.
And it does have this also like wine. It's differentiated often by geography. So you have the highlands, you've got the lowlands, you've got the island areas. You've got and so you do get a very distinctive kind of. It's more distinctive than bourbons. Bourbons tend to all come out of a similar kind of process. So there are some differences, but you want to talk about Scotch for an hour? I could.
No, actually, this is
My pandemic pal and I, all things working out, are planning a trip to Scotland in September. So we'll be sampling a dram here and there.
well.
That makes me very jealous. And are you going to do the trail?
Well, we're going to go to Edinburgh, Glasgow, rent a car, drive over to the Isle of Skye, then go up the west coast to. I've always wanted to go to the Orkney Islands, off the northern tip of Scotland, where the famous British Royal Navy base was at Scapa Flow. We're going to spend a few days on Orkney and then back to Inverness. Got to go see the Culloden battlefield where the Bonnie Prince Charlie got kicked back to France, and then back to London. So should be a fun trip. I hope it comes off.
Well, okay. I'm excited about that.
Last time you were going to ask me about what are you drinking?
Hey, no, it's actually exactly. It's awesome. I don't drink. I don't know what you're talking about. I have this little Coke Zero. That's all I really know. But I have definitely some audience members who do, and so it's great. I did want to mention back to the Super Bowl, the halftime show, which maybe will be done by then, so people can get on to see Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Eminem. Doesn't that excite any of you guys? I mean, we don't need to watch the first half, but the halftime show sounds pretty dope.
I'm
No.
I'm sort of from the Neil Diamond generation, so what do I know?
Well, I have graduated to Mute Math and Muse, but
Oh,
no.
well, I would rather watch Muse. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into our show. I just want to pull up here. I'm going to pull up the. I kind of want to shout out to your website, all many things considered. .com, Marc. And do you mind just telling us a little bit about your website and what you kind of do there, and do you post regular articles?
I do. I started it's really a blog. Started it, I don't know, probably close to 10 years ago now. Just as an outlet to write about history and politics and occasionally a book review or something like that. Over the last 3 years, maybe 4 years, it has evolved into a place where I post a piece that I write every week for the Lewiston Tribune, a daily newspaper in Lewiston, Idaho, that's nice enough to carry my work. And then I take the material that I submit to the Tribune, migrate it over to the blog, and then I have subscribers to the blog. Send that out on every Friday morning. And I usually include some other things that I've stumbled across during the week that I think are interesting or worth maybe taking a few minutes to review. Articles on politics and culture and sports and book recommendations. Occasionally, the superbly well-written obituary of somebody who's left us, that kind of thing. So I try to have a longer piece, 1,000 words or so on some political issue, often Idaho centric, not always, but often, and then a few other items that I think might be of interest to the readers. Manythingsconsidered.com.
So I'm going to do something that I haven't done before. If you'll bear with me, I'm going to actually share my screen to hopefully help the audience. I wanted the audience to see your website and specifically the article we're going to talk about. So here we go, and I don't think I can. I'll have to do that later.
Well, so let me just throw this 2 bits in here.
Yeah, you go ahead.
The thing that sets Marc's work apart, as it does, I mean, as it is true with his books, is he doesn't just sit down and rip out 1,000 words riffing off the top of his head, which would be fine, because Marc there's a lot going on there, but he does a lot of research into these. I mean, I when I think I can get away with it without getting myself in trouble, I post his stuff on my LinkedIn account, because there's usually something there that I didn't know, and it usually comes from his having done some heavy lifting, gone in and done some. And this is a case in point where there's information there that is comes from, if I may, if it comes from Marc's time as a journalist, because it's what you would do if you were trying to figure out, what have I got here? What's the story beyond just, a one-off?
Well, that's very kind of you to say, Roger. I do approach it as, at least I try to approach it as I think a journalist would approach trying to write a piece of analysis, political or cultural analysis, and not just offer up opinions, but offer up information that I think is documented by reliable sources. So I will use the blog to link to particular. There you go. To link to particular supporting elements, if you will, or background. So if somebody really, is reading this and they say, well, what did he base that on? You can click on the link and it will take you to the source. And then you can evaluate yourself as to whether that source is credible or not. But yeah, I try to approach it as a journalist would by trying to summon the facts and provide the perspective that goes along with making an analytical assessment of a particular issue or subject. Got my son coming in here. It's been beautiful, sunshiny here again all day today until about an hour and a half ago, and it got really cloudy, and now it's coming through the portals again.
I think it's good. So let's dive into the article then, Marc, if that's okay. Were you able to see it? That I was able to pull it up?
Yeah, thank you very much for highlighting it. I appreciate it.
And now, just out of curiosity, I stopped sharing. So is it just I actually can't see now where we're at, but what do you guys see?
I see you and Roger.
Okay, good. So take us into your article, specifically the Idaho Freedom Foundation. I've heard a few things about the Idaho Freedom Foundation, which I'll ask you a little bit about later. But maybe explain to our audience, what is the Idaho Freedom Foundation?
Well, Roger can help me here because he's been very well aware of this group for some time. And I have to give you a little bit of context here, I think, to understand why the piece that I wrote about them may have some relevance to how these groups operate, not just in Idaho, but all across the country. There are 60 plus think tanks, as they call themselves, at least one in every state now, that operates on this basic model of being sort of a libertarian, free market oriented, small government, small tax advocacy group, if you will. But they do it under the guise of being, sort of independent big thinkers about public policy issues. All of which I would say is a good thing. I mean, everybody with a point of view ought to be out there mixing it up in the political stratosphere, so to speak. What is, in my mind, there are a number of things that are troubling about these groups. One of them is the fact that our crazy tax code has been constructed and interpreted by the IRS, by the courts, as allowing for these groups to operate in a very non-transparent way. So the Idaho Freedom Foundation last year, according to their own IRS Form 990, raised over $900,000 from various sources. But you have no idea where that money came from. Same can be said for these groups in other states. There's an organization in Arizona, which I'm familiar with, My oldest son is a master's grad from the University of Arizona, I'm proud to say. The Goldwater Institute, named after Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential candidate in the 60s, which we talked about a few weeks ago. The Goldwater Institute has a big budget, more than $4.5 million a year. But you really don't have any idea where any of this money comes from. There's been a lot of reporting done on who is financing these groups and what their real agenda might be. A lot of it is, fairly speculative. Jane Mayer, the New Yorker writer, wrote an entire book called Dark Money about some of these groups. And she believes that, and I think made the case very persuasively, that the Koch brothers, the Bradley brothers from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Scaife family, people who are familiar with sort of the libertarian right in American politics will recognize some of these names. Betsy DeVos, the Michigan family, former Secretary of Education in the Trump administration. These are really, really wealthy people, billionaire level players.
So, in fact,
They have contributed a vast amount of money, I think, that has made its way into these state level policy influencing groups. And one of my chief beefs with them is that they're all about transparency in government and transparency for elected officials, but they don't practice any level of transparency themselves. So this, just jump ahead to the article I wrote last week. The Freedom Foundation has become quite a player in Idaho politics, very influential, I would say, within the Republican Party, particularly within kind of the libertarian hard right wing of the Republican Party. Many, many advocates of the Freedom Foundation's agenda in the state legislature that really, I think, not too much of an overstatement to say they carry the Freedom Foundation's water in the legislature on all kinds of issues, from taxes to particularly recently education policy. So where was I going with this? Basically that they have held themselves out as being champions of the free market, small government, low taxes. During the pandemic, during the Trump administration in 2020, Congress passed something called the Paycheck Protection Act and provided loans ostensibly to small business owners across the country to allow them to not lay off workers during the early days and some of the most difficult days of the pandemic. So it was fairly easy to qualify for one of these loans. And they're forgivable loans. It was basically a grant from the government to keep people employed during the worst parts of the pandemic.
so these are PPP loans, right?
PPP loans, exactly. Yes. And many people who are listening are probably familiar with, restaurants and service stations and muffler shops and hairdressers and all kinds of people applied for these loans, including, I would say, the Lewiston Tribune, the newspaper that I write for, which was really, like many newspapers, was facing real crunch time when advertising absolutely disappeared, subscriptions tumbled, et cetera, et cetera. So program saved a lot of jobs, provided a lot of relief for a lot of people at a very traumatic time in the economy. You might argue, as some have, that the program really saved the American economy from going into a deep, deep recession. So entrepreneurial reporting in Idaho produced the fact that the Freedom Foundation had actually applied for and received one of these PPP loans after spending basically 10 years of public policy advocacy bashing the very idea of this kind of a government program. So that's where the hypocrisy comes in. They qualify for the loan, try to keep it under the radar as best they can. It's exposed. The president of the organization, a fellow named Wayne Hoffman, basically, is very critical of the coverage that his group receives for having received that loan, and essentially says, the government, meaning the Idaho state government, was shutting down the economy, and it was shutting off our access to contributions from our followers. So they were shutting down people that were supporting the Freedom Foundation. So by his logic, it only made sense that they had to apply, as distasteful as it was, for this federal aid. Well, it turns out, and I think I broke this story in a little way, that not only did they receive this PPP loan, which was forgiven, but their current year IRS Form 990 shows that they actually brought more money in during 2020 than they had during 2019, even without the PPP loan. So it kind of turns on its head the argument that the loan was somehow vital to keep their doors open and their payroll up to date. So that's another level of the hypocrisy, I think, of these groups that hold themselves out to be champions of small government, low taxes, and then are at as I said in my piece, putting their Milton Friedman-like nose in the government trough. And the Freedom Foundation, I did a little bit more follow-up on this. ProPublica, a really credible website that tracks lots of things, including money in politics, has a searchable database of recipients of PPP loans. So you can type in the name of an organization and find out how much money they got from the government, which seems to me to be a good thing, a transparent thing. The Goldwater Institute got nearly $450,000 from the PPP loan program. These libertarian think tanks in other states received anywhere from $30,000 to upwards of $250,000 in government support for organizations that basically exist to bash the government.
Roger, I feel like you have something to say. We need to hear from you.
My picture is frozen. Can you hear my voice?
We can hear your voice. Let me.
Well,
You look very pensive.
Hold on, Roger. I'm gonna move you out and then move you back in.
it's not a bad picture, I have to say. I look kind of
Now, I don't see him. So while I'm bringing back in Roger, Marc, if you wouldn't maybe tell us one of the things that I think is strange about this. Here I see Roger. Is just that there's this Roger. It's showing that you will need to connect to your mic and camera. I'm not sure what's happening there with that, but Marc, one of the things that I found interesting kind of about this whole situation is, they're this libertarian think tank that supposedly is needing money to get the government out of things they don't want the government in. But what's strange is that when I went to their website just this morning, and they have this whole kind of anti-public education article. What is it about public education that's so concerning to them? And Roger, while Marc is talking, I'm going to send you a new link.
Well, I'm at a little bit of a loss, Gary, to explain what it is about public education that these groups find so distasteful. But clearly, it's part of a national agenda for these so-called libertarian state level public policy groups. It's a national theme that is rolling out in state after state. they're advocating for more extensive use of vouchers for schools, more use of charter schools, more use of vouchers even for religious schools that are sponsored by a religious entity, which once was considered sort of a inviolate line between the separation of church and state, not to use public money to support, parochial education, if you will. So clearly, there's an agenda I think, to discredit public education generally, to try to plant doubts in people's mind about the value of public schools and public higher education as well, in the interest of kind of, you know, creating a greater marketplace, I guess, for private schools, for more, religious-based education for youngsters. And I have no beef with that. One of my sons went to Catholic high school, Catholic junior high school, and high school. I have absolutely no beef with that. What I do have a beef with is folks having their tax dollars used to support that particular kind of educational experience. I think the whole notion of public education in America is a kind of a bedrock, fundamentally important concept, that there is, at some level, there is a structure that provides every kid in the country with an opportunity to get an education. And ideally, it would be a equal access and equal quality across the country. That has never been the case, but that's the ideal. And the ideal would be that every kid has an opportunity to get a quality education in a school that all of us have an investment in, because we pay taxes to support the buildings and the teachers and the books and all that sort of thing. But there's a real agenda here being driven by these groups to discredit that basic notion of a fundamental concept in America.
Maybe because they want to make money with their private institutions.
Entirely possible that is a motive. I think another motive, frankly, is sometimes you need to look at these groups and what they say and try to analyze just how much they're projecting by saying what they're saying. So one of the arguments in Idaho right now, and this is not, again, unique to Idaho, is that public schools and higher education are indoctrinating students with a particular set of political beliefs or cultural beliefs. And I think a lot of these groups that are bashing public schools and bashing public higher education are projecting, because that's exactly what they want to do. They want to have a system that provides a level of indoctrination, if you will, to students, but they want their indoctrination to be the one that is successful. I just have to hasten to add, I do not believe in any way, shape, or form that public schools or public higher education is indoctrinating students. I think the kind of education that most kids get today is based upon a well thought out curriculum, advanced at the local level by really committed teachers who love the profession and love being a part of helping young kids get an education. That's not indoctrination. That is how to teach kids critical thinking skills, how to teach them about the truth of American history, how to make sure that they get their STEM classes figured out, so that they have an opportunity to figure out how they want to spend their lives and make a contribution to society and their families. So that's not indoctrination by any means. But I think some of these folks who are pushing the anti-public school agenda do have an indoctrination approach in mind if they can get more control.
Yeah, so just the latest article at the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and Roger, I'd like welcome back, by the way. I'd like to ask for your comments. By Anna K. Miller and Dr. Scott Yenner, an article that they just wrote, Critical Social Justice, CSJ, is written into the DNA of Idaho's public education system. At the most fundamental level, Idaho's education system is designed to replace the influence of parents on the opinions and sentiments of children with the influence of public institutions. Our public education system emphasizes the principles of CSJ, which is critical social justice, a false and harmful anti American, anti Christian theology that sows racial hatred, gender confusion, and resentment. It's interesting that anything like that, Idaho's a pretty conservative state. I'm surprised that they'd have this very liberal doctrine in their public education system. What do you think about that, Roger?
Sorry, I missed a little bit of that, but knowing Marc, he's being too kind, and so I'm just going to say it out loud. These people are nuts. They I don't know whether they believe what they espouse or whether they are pushing things that they know to be untrue, but in some way can benefit them. It's probably a little of both. It's hard for me to imagine that semi-intelligent people can actually believe most of what they actually put out there, because what you just read is very mild compared to a lot of the stuff they put on their own website, and a lot of their leadership comes out of Eastern Idaho, my hometown. Two of the key leaders in the Freedom Foundation are from Eastern Idaho and very well known. And I'm not going to go into details about them because they're also quite litigious, but known quantities for a very, very long time. So, and I don't think they can't possibly have spent much time inside our high schools or our universities, because they simply they don't want to know, because these the people teaching in our high schools are just trying to hang on. The last thing they want to deal with is most of them, all of them probably had never heard of critical race theory until it was brought up by the right. No one had didn't know what it was. The idea that social justice is a bad idea is completely Orwellian. But here's what they do is they have the megaphones of a handful of people who are shameless, who will just say the most outrageous things, and it gets a certain amount of attention. They have one person in particular at Boise State who is completely a nut job, who openly professes that women shouldn't be involved in the law or engineering, and such things as that. He's one of their heroes. There's a guy out of BYU, Idaho, who is in the state legislature, who says the absolutely most outrageous things, and who is one of their heroes. So I'm torn sometimes between wanting to shine a light on this stuff and wanting to bury it as deeply as we possibly can bury it and pretend it doesn't exist. Of course, that doesn't help, because at some point you've got to expose it, which is what Marc and others are doing. So that's my 2 cents on this. And I don't mean to be flippant about it, because they are doing real harm. They Wayne Hoffman, who was a journalist way back in the day, and who's gotten more and more shrill as time has gone on, and as he's gotten paid more and more money, he's now well into a 6-figure income operating this deal. Just says out loud, government shouldn't be in the business of education, which is almost beyond libertarian. It's almost, it's beyond in in Idaho's state constitution, which was not written yesterday or by liberals. The young people of Idaho are guaranteed a free and what's the
Equal,
term?
equal.
Free and equal education. Of course, the Idaho Supreme Court found years ago that they were not getting a free and equal education, but it had no remedy, and so it offered no solution, and it goes on.
There was actually a report over the last few days from the legislature's own auditing office showing a backlog in maintenance of school buildings and construction of school buildings in Idaho of $1,300,000,000 in deferred maintenance. That tells you something about how effective some of these folks have been in starving the public education system at a time when the state is running record budget surpluses. So there's a real desire here to, as I said earlier, to really diminish, tear down, um, and I think basically do all you can to eliminate public education as a feature of American society. And for the first time, really, in the last year or so, I wonder if Roger would agree with this, but you're really seeing some pretty senior people in Idaho really push back against this now.
No,
People,
I think I think that's right, Mark. I think that's one of the better outcomes. Of course, they're now being these very conservative, um, not even really moderate Republicans are now being called rhinos by the far right, which is the the go-to accusation. The way it works, the way we don't provide equal education in Idaho is so much as time has gone on, and this goes back. This goes back to a current U.S. senator from Idaho who was governor for a cup of coffee about 10 years ago, and he changed how the school funding was done. And what the result of that is that local districts now have to go out and beg and scrap for money, not to enhance, but to basically hang in there. And so, if you go to Salmon, Idaho, there's a section of the high school that is closed for use because it is in danger of collapsing. And if you drive 2 hours south to Ketchum, you get to go to the Starship Enterprise because that's going to happen to one degree or another, but it's not what was intended when the Idaho Constitution was built, but it's the obvious and inevitable outcome if you were to take libertarianism to its ultimate objective, which is a free market for everything. So poor folks can just scrounge and for a basic education, and the rich folks get to have the big buildings and the nice equipment and the high paid teachers, and that is not my view of America.
Gary, there's one other aspect here that is worth highlighting, I think, and that's something that the president of the University of Idaho recently really shined a light on in a way that I don't remember anybody ever doing quite the same way before in the state. A year ago, during the legislative session, the Idaho Freedom Foundation and a group of its acolytes in the legislature were successful in reducing the budgets for the three state universities, Idaho State in Pocatello, Boise State, and the University of Idaho in Moscow, by more than $2.5 million on the theory that they were using that amount of money to advance these social justice principles on the college campuses. Scott Greene is the president of the University of Idaho. He came from a business background to become the president of the university. And the university is the land grant institution in the state. It's got the law school, engineering school, the traditional land grant mission of the ag school, the traditional land grant mission of a school. So he comes before the state legislature's budget committee a couple of weeks ago, and he really blasted the Freedom Foundation for creating, as he called it, a false narrative around this, making up a story about the fact that the universities were advancing this social justice message. And he coined the term that is taken off now. He said they're conflict entrepreneurs. And that's the thing that I want to underscore. The conflict is what is really at the heart of this. To try to keep people ginned up about some conflict, something that they should be angry about, that they have a grievance about. Somebody is doing something that doesn't, comport with their worldview. Create the controversy is really what this is all about. If you can keep the controversy going, you can keep the money wheel spinning, you can keep the press releases flowing, and you can create the havoc that they are attempting and to a large degree have created in education in Idaho. So a shout out to the president of the University of Idaho for in public saying what I think a lot of people really believe about these groups, that they are all about just creating conflict in their own self-interest.
I'll also just throw this out, Gary and Mark, that because I'm a member of the faculty at CEI, a two-year school, and I'm privy to internal conversations among the faculty. I'm on the faculty senate at CEI. There is indeed a chilling effect that this stuff has on teachers and faculty, at least among those with whom I am familiar, because they just don't want to draw the attention to themselves. They don't. I think I mentioned this in a prior conversation last fall. One of my students wanted to do. I teach public speaking. One of my students wanted to do a presentation on how the election was stolen from Trump, and I said he couldn't do it. And in his evaluation of me at the end of the course, he said that I was biased and wouldn't let him, and that my politics had shown in not letting him do that presentation. But that's the kind of thing where we talk about it among faculty members. And I have to believe it's also discussed among faculty members at UI and Boise State and ISU, because you've got to weigh how much attention do we want to draw to ourselves.
Yeah, and it's part of the tactic as well to to sow discord, to be an intimidating factor for people who are making a living and supporting families and that sort of thing in the teaching profession. So yeah, it's really a pretty pernicious strategy.
So isn't Wayne Hoffman? I think another thing that's concerned me about the Idaho Freedom Foundation. It's Wayne Hoffman, right? He's the president, but I think that I had heard he was also not only pushing for this Stop the Steal campaign with the false claims of the election, but has also helped perpetuate this idea that states can send their own electors or fake electors or some other slate if they don't like the outcome of their state's voting for the president. Is that, have you heard that about him as well, in terms of kind of undermining the electoral process?
I'm not familiar with that. What they have clearly undermined in Idaho, in addition to trying to undermine the education system, is the public health response to the COVID pandemic. They have been on the front lines of pushing misinformation, sowing discord around things like mask mandates, they're a big champion of the current lieutenant governor who's running for governor. And she's been a leading conspiracy theorist about COVID. So that I think they've been more active in that space, Gary, than they have been in the election denial.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mark. I haven't heard the electoral thing, although I haven't necessarily heard everything to come out of the Freedom Foundation. But I do know that, for example, the vice president of the Freedom Foundation has referred to the pandemic as so-called. He's used that term, the so-called pandemic. So I don't even know what he can even do with that when
Yeah. I mean, I think about just this whole issue, just in Republican politics, but really in conservatism. So you mentioned white grievance. I don't know how much you've paid attention to Mormon news, but a leader, Brad Wilcox, in the Mormon Church, he actually was my second grade teacher.
Okay, Gary, I got to tell you,
Yeah.
he grew up in my neighborhood.
So his mom
dated my sister.
He what?
He once dated my sister way back in the day. He grew up 4 blocks from me on Grandview Hill in Provo.
In Provo. Yep. So I went to Provost, and this obviously shows our age difference, but I was like in second grade, and he was my teacher going on for his degree. But he, for those who don't know, he gave a talk that went kind of viral. Well, it did go viral, about why the Mormon Church withheld the priesthood from African Americans until 1978, which is essentially the church of the Mormon Church maintained segregation, really pushed for segregation and maintained segregation until 1978. And his response was, "We're asking the wrong question. The real question is, why did the whites and other races have to wait until 1829 to receive this special power of the priesthood?" And when he said that, it's just so clear. It's pervasive, I think, and maybe has been taught for a long time, that whites are being aggrieved somehow, or that whites are. I don't know, but it reminds me of things that I'm seeing with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Go ahead, Roger. I
just can't help I can't help it. I'm very sorry for what I'm about to say, but it's your fault. You took us into the weeds, and so I'm going to go play there. So in 1978, I was a missionary in Hong Kong, and we got the call from the mission home that the blacks had been given the priesthood. And I got off the phone. No, I didn't take the call. The district leader who was in the apartment with us got off the phone and read it, and somebody said it out loud. Well, I guess the last bad black dude died finally, and so we can. And it was not intended to be a joke. I mean, and it wasn't said quite that way, but that's the sort of the pervasiveness of that, how that can just seep in, and if so it's complicated. And yes, these things are not harmless. This is why I suggested that we go into Marc's most recent blog post, because I think it gets to the heart of some really. It's not just about Idaho. It's not just about the Idaho Freedom Foundation. It's about the big picture, the big issues.
Well, and those big issues, I'm going to just kind of dwell on this for a second with the Mormon Church, just because it's obviously throughout Idaho and Utah, and we have connections, but it's also because it does represent a conservatism mindset, along with other religions, but I'm most familiar with my own, which, after blacks, after the African American people were okay to receive the priesthood in 1978, throughout the 80s, Elder or President Dallin H. Oaks, who is now in the first presidency, spent a lot of time with his legal background ensuring that women, for example, do not have the same rights as men. They wanted to really fight for this idea of religious freedom so that they could tell a woman who is employed by the church when she gets pregnant, they don't have to keep the job for her because they believe that she should just stay home and take care of her babies, right? And so they want an exemption, a religious exemption, to discriminating. Whereas for me as an employer, I'd have to hold that job for her or anyone that goes out on FMLA. So when I read the Freedom Foundation different articles, and I think it's this political science professor Yenner, I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name correctly. He is at Boise State. He's made comments about women as well, right? It's women should stay at home. We shouldn't be encouraging them to be engineers. We should just have men be engineers and physicians and go into the medical profession. So it's not just like white grievance, but white male grievance. Is is that just kind of the flavor of this of new conservatism? What are your thoughts?
Well, my overriding thought is save us from mediocre white men. You know, um, I happen to know Scott Yaner a little bit. He was I think he was the head of the political science department at Boise State when I taught a class there a number of years ago. So I got a little bit acquainted with him, and I've actually been on a program with him where we talked about none of this stuff. He has an interest, or at least it did at that time, in Civil War history, and we both gave a talk on different aspects of the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. Um, he's a very well-spoken, um, I I think, thoughtful guy in a lot of ways. But some of the things that he has said recently, in the guise of sort of academic research on the role of women in society, I mean, it's a throwback to the 1500s. It's really incredible. And I would think that, any dad with a young daughter who, had aspirations to be in a profession, art, uh, medicine, law, science, engineering, would be absolutely appalled that a guy who makes his living uh, from the taxpayers at a publicly financed institution would hold such, well, let's say it, misogynistic views. I mean, how can you say it any way but that? I mean, these are just throwback ideas that have, uh, frankly, no relevance to the modern world. I mean, you think about the three of us, think about the accomplished women that we know and have worked with in our lives and in our families. How could you possibly believe that they shouldn't have every opportunity to get as far as they want to go, as far as their ability can take them, in any line of work that they might want to pursue? I mean, it's just amazing to me that somebody would make that comment in public in the year 2021. 2021, I guess, is when he made the comment.
When
But
the
Barry, it's back to the. Excuse me, Roger. Just real quick, it's back to the conflict. Uh, he said that, I would argue, in no small part because he knew it would be controversial, and it would get him on, a right wing broadcast outlet. It would get him favorably mentioned in the right wing media as, a truth teller to the woke liberals out there in higher education. And rather than just call it what it is, which is a crock, a lot of people have said, well, have excused it or allowed it to go without comment.
under the guise of academic freedom, among other things, which is also complete nonsense. Imagine if you were a woman who had to go through his class to get the degree in political science at Boise State. Imagine how, what that would feel like. Just, it's just beyond imagining. To go back to the 70s and 80s in the LDS Church, and when they were so effectively against the ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, and were really, I think if you look at it now, because it came so close to getting passed, that the church certainly was one of the key factors in not getting it through. This was at the same time. This was in the 70s when Utah's economy was not like it is today, when Utah had a higher percentage of its workforce that were women than the national average by quite a long way, because Utah paid so badly and because there was no choice. One person in a household couldn't make a living. And the truth is today, that's the point, is that kind of double-sided hypocrisy that I don't, it's rampant and rearing its head in institutional ways now that have been buried for a long time. There's a lot more. It's just more brazen than it has been in a very long time.
You're about to see something that is going to be really remarkable. I will predict. You're going to see a black woman, a very accomplished African American woman, nominated for a seat on the Supreme Court, a historic appointment. It's going to happen. And you're going to see that nominee, whomever she might be, with a stellar legal and maybe a judicial background. You'll see people argue, responsible people in high public office argue that woman is not suitable for the Supreme Court because she's been placed there as a token, as some political gift to the African American community by a Democratic president. Mark my words, you're going to see that line of argument.
Ted Cruz has already said it.
Yep.
I mean, it's already out there. I mean, the idea that, well, we're supposed to be selecting the very best candidate for the position that we can possibly find, without regard for race, gender, creed, etc. Well, okay. So for the vast majority of the history of our country, that meant only old white dudes. You can't even. It's hard to even conjure the words to rebut that, because it's so obvious.
Republican Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana said that we needed somebody who was capable of doing more than reading a J. Crew catalog. I mean, what an absolutely outrageous thing to say about a woman who's gone through, rigorous academic preparation, a law career, and I suspect any of the nominees is going to be a sitting judge someplace with a track record of ruling in cases, with a lot of writing to study, and to have a white member of the United States Senate say about a prospective black nominee that we need somebody who can read more than the J. Crew catalog.
So, gentlemen, as we kind of one piece of this article that I wanted to try to call out or address is that in my younger political years, when I found myself a little, for me, because of how I was raised, I really believed that there should be full separation of church and state. So I was surprised I became a Republican delegate, in my probably mid-20s, and was pretty surprised to see how much religion drives the party, and naive as I am. So it started to really turn me off of the Republican Party. And by the way, for all of those fellow Mormons out there watching who are wondering why I'm bothered by that, it's because I was raised to believe that the reason we were able to even have a Mormon church is because of democratization of religion in a country where there is no favored religion. There's no support for one religion over another. The founding forefathers intended for religion to be something that you could practice on your own without intervention or help from the government. So that caused me to, lose more and more interest in the Republican Party. Of course, as a growing up Mormon and a Republican, I was not going to look into the Democratic Party, of course. So the one place I thought maybe I might find a home is libertarianism. I didn't really find it didn't really ring for me. But let me tell you what I remember it being. Libertarianism seemed to be not Republican, not religious, certainly not specifically Christian, and it was almost just like anarchy, but not quite that bad, right? It was we don't have government involvement, or it's just the states or local government that should have some role, limiting the federal government. Going to Vermont where there are no at all, government institutions in place at all. So drugs are free, right? We're not regulating the markets or just laissez-faire, right? And so then what happened with now libertarianism seems to be just more of an alt-right hybrid.
Well, I think I think it goes back to, in my mind, goes back to the election that I wrote about in 1980, when you saw for the first time, really, the emergence of this new right in America as a real political force, supporting President Reagan at that time, supporting lots of members of Congress. And one of the founders, or one of the leading lights of the new right, was a guy named Terry Dolan, who was a founder of the National Conservative Political Action Committee. And he actually said in an interview one time in 1979 or 80 with the Washington Post that he thought the role of government was national defense and nothing else. I mean, absolutely nothing else. So I think we're seeing in some respects, a portion of the Republican traditional conservative movement in America is increasingly embracing that notion. But they're a little bit hypocritical about it, because they don't want it to go too far, because if you really go too far, then some of the things that they really care about are in danger of being trampled on. So they can apply that to the public schools. They can apply that to low taxes, lack of regulation of environmental issues, and that sort of thing. But at some point, you meet yourself coming and going. You go so far to the right, you come back around, and I think that's part of the danger of what some of these folks that espouse that view are talking about. I think the leading libertarian in the country right now probably is Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky. He speaks more like a libertarian every day than anybody else that I know of in national politics. And he's out there this weekend advocating for trucker strikes all over the country to, paralyze the government and, even disrupt the Super Bowl this weekend.
Paralyze our
In the
economy.
world, does that have anything to do with a political philosophy beyond chaos and conflict? I just don't get it.
If you really spend time looking into libertarianism, as I have done, it sounds like, Gary, you probably have too, and I know Marc has. If you really spend time looking into the pure theory, it's quite seductive. There are parts of it that are,
I agree.
that you kind of, particularly the personal liberty pieces of libertarianism are quite attractive. And there are other, but when you start getting into the perfection of the invisible hand, how an unfettered free market is always going to be right, and those kinds of things. And then what happens is institutions like the Freedom Foundation and others pick and choose pieces of libertarianism that they find either attractive or useful, and toss the rest aside. And beyond the fact that in practice libertarianism cannot work, it simply
Right.
cannot work. Um, there are parts of it that are just really interesting and attractive, and I get it. I've subscribed to the magazines. I've followed the Cato Institute. I find some of their work quite interesting, but only to a point.
Yeah, so one of the dilemmas that libertarians confront is they can say, for example, the government shouldn't be mandating that I get a vaccine or wear a mask or observe some kind of public health strategy during a worldwide pandemic. But then, if the government can't mandate that, how can the government mandate getting in the way of a woman's um, reproductive rights based upon her own religious beliefs or her interaction with her own physician? So there's a inherent conflict between saying that government has no role in a vaccine mandate, for example, and then at the same time not extending it more broadly to other aspects of where the government clearly has interceded in our lives.
Or that the government can't say you don't get to drive while drunk. That's a mandate.
Right.
And
Or wear a
and
seatbelt or have automobile insurance or whatever it might be. Yeah.
in Idaho, I know we're out of time. In Idaho, it's still legal to drive a motorcycle without a helmet. And so far as I'm concerned, okay, probably you're not going to hurt anybody else if you're, doing 80 on a motorcycle without a helmet. So whatever. But when you get personal liberties in conflict with the obvious greater good, the obvious danger to other people, it becomes pretty simple, I think. And it's not. We don't need to overthink that.
Well, and I think this Freedom Foundation, and I'm really grateful, Mark, that you took the time to write the article, because there's danger. One of the things I hope that we are able to do with this Sunday afternoon show is to alert our audience to danger, stranger danger. And I think the IFF is one of those dangerous organizations that guises itself in whatever kind of makes you feel warm and comfortable as a community member. They're Christian, so maybe that makes you feel like that they're legitimate or that they share your values, and they don't. I promise, they just don't. And ultimately, what begins to happen is that they are really using you to make money off of their private schools or whatever Betsy DeVos was doing, right? Becoming a multi-million heir, using the free market capital system to provide education to your kids through these voucher programs, but there is no educational standard. Who knows what they're being taught? It doesn't do anything to benefit the kids. It just benefits the people that are, grifting off of your good graces. So, I think our uh, call to action for our audience, it goes back to local politics, right? This is right in Idaho. We also have very similar issues in Utah. These senators, these Congress people or representatives have a lot of influence, but there are also not so-called not-for-profits and even religions that have inappropriate and undue influence as well that we can actually tell people about and work towards educating and maybe stopping it. Mark, you had a comment?
Well, I would just say, Gary, just to underscore what I think you're driving at. Um, the thing that I always ask myself when I look at these groups is what is their real motive? What is their real agenda? And one way you can gauge that is to ask yourself who's behind them, who's financing them, what would that motive be? And I guess I'm of the old school about American democracy. I think sunshine is a disinfectant. When you put things out in the open so that you can see where the strings and the connections lead, then you have more information to judge what a person or a group's motives might be. That's why disclosure of political contributions is so important. Most people don't pay much attention to it, but it's really, really important. So if you see something that you question or maybe even you agree with, ask yourself every time, who's behind this? What's their motive? Who's paying for this? Why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they advocating the message they're advocating? Maybe you agree with the message, but it's still worth asking who's pushing it, who's financing it.
Roger.
What Marc
Sure.
said.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to also mention that I think two of the major donors to this Freedom Foundation in Idaho are other organizations that are kind of can keep their donors anonymous. So it means that you can't even see
Right.
who's donating to them, right?
Well,
What I would ask is, what are you afraid of? Why are you?
Right.
And the answer is going to be, oh, because nasty people are going to come after our people. No, they're not. No, that's not the reason. It's not the reason.
Yeah, it's just a basic fundamental question that you ought to ask about any political actor. Who's behind them? Who supports them? Who's financing them? And when you can't see that, it ought to raise a red flag for you, whether the group is on the right or the left politically. And there are plenty on the left that are doing the same thing now.
Right.
Uh, hiding behind the tax code and um, the ability not to disclose who your donors are. But that raises, in my mind, a red flag. If you're trying so hard to not be transparent, then there must be something that you're going to have trouble explaining, or you wouldn't go to the trouble of being so secretive about who's supporting you.
I've said this before. One of the fundamental elements of media literacy is when you go to a website, go to the About Us tab, open it, and what does it tell you? And if it doesn't tell you anything, run away.
Exactly
fast.
Right. Yep.
I had a friend who, actually, a couple of friends during the Obama administration that were very, very convinced that the economy was about to collapse and the U.S. dollar wouldn't be worth anything, and so they were really very vulnerable to these a couple of books they were reading and websites about just confirming that fear that they had, that the economy was on its way out, the dollar was on its way out, so you should buy gold. And so the only thing that will really survive post apocalypse is gold or silver. But then at the end of the book, or you look up the author or you look up his website, and what does he sell? Gold, or he sells you silver, right? And anytime I would show that to my friends, I'm like, so this guy's trying to sell you gold, and he's fearing you into doing it. You realize that? Oh yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of truth here. They really couldn't even though I pointed it out to them, they almost didn't want to see that's what he was doing.
This has been around for so long in the Mormon culture in particular. If you go back, I'm sure you've probably heard of the name Howard Ruff. Maybe
No.
you haven't. This goes back to the 70s and 80s. Howard Ruff, RUFF, look him up. That's all I'm going to say. The gold scam has been around for a very long time. And what exactly is it about gold that's so, that's going to save everything? What? Just can you cook it? Can you?
Yeah. I don't think if I don't have any water in the apocalypse, I don't think anybody's going to care if I have gold.
It's even bulky to hide in your mattress.
It's heavy.
So I think you might have just given us a name that we could do a show about later, Roger. Hey, for Roger, is Wayne Hoffman any relation to Marc Hoffman or the Hoffman? Okay.
Not that I know of.
Okay. Well, I think we had a great show, Marc. Thank you for your Friday posts, and we will. You go ahead, Marc.
Well, thank you, Gary, for your interest in it and for highlighting it to those who are viewing. I appreciate it.
For sure, for sure. So we'll let everybody go and enjoy the rest of their Sunday evening. Those that want to go, I think the people that stayed and watched don't care about the Bengals or the Rams either way. But we really enjoy our audience. Remember to like and subscribe. Take time to be with your families. And are there any parting words, Roger or Marc, that you want to leave our audience?
Be skeptical.
Go Zags.
Peace out, everybody.